Critical thinking skills are vital to our students. But as educators that are bogged down doing all the other stuff we're required to do, how do we have time to integrate critical thinking skills into what we do every day? Well, luckily we don't have to figure that out because someone else has already done it for us. There's a man named Benjamin Bloom, and he was a psychologist. And Benjamin Bloom created something called Bloom's Taxonomy. Bloom's Taxonomy is a classification of questions. And as you climb the taxonomy up this pyramid, you get into higher order thinking skills. You create critical thinking skills in your students when you use Bloom's Taxonomy. So as educators, we can use this as a reference tool to remind us that we need to ask increasingly tougher questions to help our students be better critical thinkers. The first thing in Bloom's taxonomy at the very bottom is to remember. This is the most basic level of questioning. This is what you usually ask your students, what parents usually ask their children. This is just recall of information. This is when you ask students for facts. The who, the what, the where, the why, and the how. You might use words like describe, name, list, relate, find, tell, write. Most students are able to do this remembering. And remembering is important, but it doesn't display critical thinking skills. So as we climb, we're going to get into higher order thinking skills. So now we get to understanding. Now, understanding is when we see if students understand the information. You might ask questions with words like explain, compare, restate, predict. This is when students are going to explain what happened in their own words. So they're not just spitting out facts, but they're actually starting to apply, and that's the next one. And apply is when students use information to solve problems. You might use words like show me, complete this, use, classify, examine, illustrate, solve. You might ask students to predict what would happen next or to continue the story. And then we get to analyze, and this is when students draw conclusions. This is when you might use words like explain, examine, investigate, identify. You might ask questions like, why do you think that happened? What is this theme? Can you identify the parts? Then we get to evaluate, and this is where students form an opinion. You might use words like justify, prioritize, recommend, choose. This is when students are going to put themselves in the shoes of the character or whatever it is that you are learning that day. And then lastly, we have create. Now, create is at the top of the pyramid because this is where students are displaying the highest critical thinking skills. And this is when students are going to make something new. You might use words like create, plan, invent, construct, imagine. This is when students are going to start to think about changes they could make, what they would do if they were in charge. So here we have it. This is Bloom's taxonomy. These are the 6 levels of higher order thinking skills. Now that's all great, but how do we actually apply this in the classroom? Here are examples of questions that you can ask your students to help you climb up this ladder of higher order thinking skills. So let's say that we are teaching a lesson on the boy who cried wolf. We just read the story as a class, and we are now going to check comprehension by asking some questions. So if you haven't read The Boy Who Cried Wolf, it's about a little boy who would lie and always say that there was a wolf chasing him. The townspeople believed him, and they would run terrified, only to find out that the little boy was lying. And then one day, the little boy was really being chased by a wolf, but no one believed him, and he died. So that's the story. And now we're going to ask these questions of our students. Now, at the remembering level, the very bottom of Bloom's taxonomy, you might ask a question like, who is the main character? Remember, this is where we're asking about facts. So you're going to ask, who is the main character? That's an easy one. The students might tell you that it's the little boy who cried wolf. Now we know they remember. Then we get to the understanding level. And this is where you're going to see if students can explain in their own words what happened in the story. You might ask a question like, what is the main idea of the story? So your students will start thinking, maybe in The Boy Who Cried Wolf, a student would say that the main idea of the story is that when you lie, you could get hurt or maybe even be in danger. Now, once the student is remembering and understanding, you'll want to ask an applying question. It could be something like this. What questions would you ask in an interview with the main character? Now the student's going to have to apply what they heard in the story to what they would actually do in real life. So if a student was sitting down with the boy who cried wolf, maybe they would ask questions like, why did you lie? How did it make you feel when you lied? How did you feel when the wolf was really chasing you? Now, once the student has remembered and understood and applied, then you'll want to ask an analyzing question. And it could be something like this. How is the story related to your life? Now the students are going to have to think about what they remember, the facts, what they understood about the story, and what that might have to do with them. If the student had said in the understanding phase that when you lie, you could be put in danger, they might tell about a time when they lied and they got in trouble and they were in danger because they missed out on something really awesome. Now, once a student is remembered and understood and applied and analyzed, then as an educator, it's your responsibility to make sure that they know how to evaluate. You can ask a question like, what choice would you have made if you were in the story? So now the student is going to put themselves in the little boy who cried wolf's place. Would they have lied? Or maybe they'll put themselves in the place of one of the townspeople, the people who didn't believe the boy who cried wolf at the end. Would they have believed the boy who cried wolf? And once a student is remembered, understood, applied, analyzed, and evaluated, then they get to the very top of the pyramid where they are able to create. And a question like this might be something that you could ask. How would you adapt the plot to create a different story? So now the student's going to be thinking, okay, what is the plot? He remembers that from remember. What was the main idea? Well, I learned that if you lie, it could get you hurt. And then the student can start to think maybe they'll change up the location or the time period. Maybe they will change the animal. This is when a student's going to take all of those other things that have built up to this point and use what they've already established to create something new. And so as a teacher, this is a really great way that you can scaffold and build on what your students are learning to create higher order thinking skills to help them become critical thinkers. But there's more. There's another really great way that you can use Bloom's taxonomy in your classroom, and that is with technology. Before you see a pyramid that has different icons from different technological resources. And this goes along with Bloom's taxonomy. So at the bottom, you'll see that it says remembering. And so these are tools you can use with your students when you're at the remembering phase. This is where students are recalling facts. So they could use a search engine like Google or YouTube to learn about a story or do some research. And then once they remember, you can go to the understanding phase and they can use things like Twitter or Skype or Bubble Us. And then when you get to applying, they can use things like PowerPoint or Picasa. And for analyzing, they could use Mindomo or SurveyMonkey. And at evaluating stage, they could use BrainPop or YouTube. And then at the creating stage, they could create something of their own, like a wiki space or Prezi or even a blog. This is a great way for you to be able to differentiate in your classroom because you may have different students at different levels of critical thinking. So your students that are great evaluators, well, they can be using Wikipedia and BrainPop, while your students who are still the understanding phase can be using Skype and Bubble Us and different resources. So not only is Bloom Taxonomy really great for asking questions in the classroom, it's really a great way to apply technological resources as well. So remember, in order to help our students become great critical thinkers, we need to make sure that they can remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. And as educators, it's our responsibility to ask them these questions to get their minds thinking.